The Tower Bridge, Buckingham Palace or Big Ben. London has a sheer endless number of attractions that draw millions of tourists every year to the British capital. But there's one landmark that in the past years has been making headlines for all the wrong reasons. British Museum, home to artifacts spanning over 2 million years of human history. It stands as a unique place where the stories of cultures and countries, traditions and wars, power and heritage are preserved and showcased. So why is a museum dedicated to sharing the world's history, giving British youth and visitors a chance to learn about other cultures, without traveling across the globe facing so much criticism, that it even got its own episode on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver? Let's uncover the answer in this video. Last summer I spent a few days in London, and naturally the British Museum was high on my bucket list, just as it is for nearly 6 million people every year, making it the 4th most visited museum in the world. Only the Louvre, the Vatican Museums and the National Museum of China attract more visitors annually. Those visitors are not disappointed. Even National Geographic named it one of the 10 best museums in the world. So let's head over and see what makes it so special. If you're planning a visit, you can reserve your tickets in advance to skip the lines. But don't worry if you didn't. You can still join the line at the back of the museum and make your way in. Although the line was long, the wait surprisingly wasn't. This might have something to do with the lack of ticket checks, because the museum charges as much for admission as it paid for most of its artifacts. Nothing. The museum is truly impressive, and if you're a nerd for history and different cultures like me, then you will absolutely have a blast learning about the entire history of humankind. But as I mentioned earlier, we can't talk about this museum without acknowledging the story of why everything arrived here. During the 1600s, the British Empire kept expanding until it became the world's largest ever empire, controlling up to 1/4 of the Earth's area and population. And even though the trade of spices played a huge role in the colonization, British food today still looks like this. While we all know about the people, wealth and resources that the British took home from these colonies, there's another side to the story, the artifacts. Many of these items were deeply significant to the cultures that created them, yet they were brought back to Britain, often without consent.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
Nothing. Me? Just hanging around.
I mean, it does make sense, because one of the famous statues from the Easter Islands is a much cooler Christmas present than a $30 IKEA gift card. A lot of these cultural and historic artifacts that were brought back home to Britain ended up in the British Museum that was opened in 1753 and has grown into Britain's largest museum. Its unique status as a universal museum was not just a source of pride for Britain, but also a place of honor for those who brought these treasures home. Displaying artifacts from faraway lands was seen as a mark of prestige and admiration for the collectors and explorers of the time. While some pieces were acquired through legal means, the issue lies with the many that weren't. Let's take a closer look at some of these controversial items. One prominent example is the Rosetta Stone that was discovered by Napoleon's army in Egypt in 1799. The artifact was instrumental in helping Europeans decipher hieroglyphs for the very first time. That is because the stone is covered near the Egyptian city of Rashid, or Rosetta, contains inscriptions in 3 scripts: ancient hieroglyphs, Demotic Egyptian and ancient Greek. All 3 texts are translations of each other. While the details of how it passed from the French to the British army after Napoleon's defeat remain murky, one thing is clear: the Rosetta Stone holds immense cultural significance for Egyptians, yet today it's prominently displayed in the British Museum. Another famous case involves the Parthenon sculptures, or Elgin Marbles, which were removed from the Acropolis in Athens by Thomas Elgin, the 7th Earl of Elgin, whatever that means, in the 19th century. Now, I don't know what would happen if I, as a random dude, decided to remove pieces from an ancient monument, but I'd be in trouble, big trouble, and I definitely couldn't display them in my fancy museum. I mean, just imagine that I would lean over the rope and touch one of these pieces. I would easily be thrown out of the museum, but there are no consequences for the guy who broke it off the fucking Acropolis. But perhaps the most famous or infamous example of this looting is the case of the Benin Bronzes. In 1897, during Britain's colonization of Africa, thousands of statues, plaques and other treasures were looted from the royal palace of the Kingdom of Benin, now part of modern-day Nigeria. These artifacts were then sold to institutions across Europe and the United States. Today, many of these bronzes can be found in renowned museums like the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and the Humboldt Forum in Berlin. The Benin Bronzes are hard to categorize as one group of items. They weren't just decorative items to put on the wall like a Live, Love, Love poster, but hold the history of the Kingdom of Benin, including the social life and histories of kingship. Instead of writing down the events that occurred over time, the kings visualized them via plaques. When the British looted the palace, they didn't just steal a proud nation's history. They also mixed and matched these items, therefore changing the order that historic events took place. The Benin Bronzes were specifically targeted by the British Army, because during the colonization of Africa, reports of valuable treasures in the royal palace made them think that selling these items could offset the costs of the invasion. The history of the Benin Bronzes is a stark reminder that colonization wasn't just about exploiting labor and land. In addition to enslaving people and stripping them of their freedoms, colonizers took their most prized cultural treasures as victory trophies, symbols of dominance over the very people they oppressed. Now it should be noted that those aren't the only controversies that the British Museum is facing. Take for example its 10-year £50 billion partnership with BP, a company that brought us environmental disasters like the Deepwater Horizon spill, and is a significant contributor to climate change. In 2019, its 415 metric tons of carbon emissions are just slightly less than the 451 metric tons that the entire UK emitted. Such a sponsorship feels increasingly out of touch with modern values, especially considering the museum's commitment to a net zero future. Additionally, many of the items acquired by the museum after 1933 come with a questionable history, with many suspected of being Jewish possessions stolen by Nazi Germany. Calls to return them to the rightful owner have been ignored. So now the question remains, what can we do about it? Well, the answer for the British Museum is easy. Return the stolen items and publicly apologize for the harm caused. Some institutions have already taken steps in the right direction. In 2022, the Humboldt Forum in Berlin, the Met in New York, and even other museums within London signed an agreement to return most of the Benin Bronzes to Nigeria, while some pieces will remain on loan. But there's still a long way to go. Many museums must follow suit and return artifacts to the rightful owners. British Museum, for instance, continues to refuse to return the Benin Bronzes it holds. And what about us? Raising awareness is one of the most impactful things that we can do. Keeping the spotlight on these issues helps drive accountability. Colonization has caused a lot of death and pain on the places and societies that it has affected. While we can see that pain today, and reports of past cruelties by Europeans seem far away and abstract, objects that are displayed right in front of our eyes tell a visual story of a stolen identity. Ironically, the British Museum was intended to celebrate human history, yet its legacy has become inseparably tied to the history of colonization. It's true that having artifacts from across the globe displayed in one place free of charge is both beautiful and educational. The British Museum offers an incredible opportunity to learn about the rich tapestry of human history. But for many people around the world, being unable to see important sculptures and art connected to their ancestors and culture is sad and incredibly unfair. Not everyone can simply fly to London to visit this museum, nor should they have to. And the British Museum isn't alone in this. Institutions like the Louvre, which displays stolen artifacts like the Dendera Zodiac, and the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, home to the Pergamon altar, face similar scrutiny. That being said, if you are in London, the British Museum is surely a great place to visit, to educate yourself about the history of the world. But it's important to remember the complicated and often painful history behind its collection. These artifacts tell not just the stories of ancient civilizations, but also the story of colonialism and the ongoing struggle for cultural restitution.